Real quick, what is your suite? What do you like what kind of commercial state do you like? Multiple units? You like one big giant warehouse? Industrial warehouses. What kind of commercial real estate do you like?
I like any piece of real estate that I can create significant value in beyond my cost to create that value. So I will do warehouse, retail, office, apartments. We do anything as long as it is not performing at peak performance when I buy it, and then I can use my system to bring it to peak performance.
Now, as far as a large industrial warehouse, which you have like massive amount of like, let's say square footage, as opposed to multiple, renters on a retail. I mean, does that factor into your decision making sometimes? Because you're like, look, less work, less liability.
Yeah, I prefer multi-tenant buildings as a general rule of thumb, but it doesn't mean I'll rule out a single tenant building, especially if we're buying it under our multi-asset fund, because then we're diversified across multiple assets. So if I had 10 single tenant buildings and any one of those tenants didn't pay, I still have 9 other buildings to generate cash enough to pay the 10th mortgage. But if I was just buying one McDonald's and that was my only piece of real estate that I was going to buy,
right,
that's a horrible investing strategy, because if McDonald's decides not to pay you, and a lot of people had a wake-up call on COVID when big companies that they thought was basically guaranteed income stopped paying their bills. Right. People who are not diversified. So I love diversification. I just don't love diversification in stocks that I have absolutely no control over.
Right.
And you when you invest in the stock market or through mutual funds or ETFs or even bonds, you have zero control over your future. Period. End of story. As much control as you think and diversification you think. If the whole market goes down, you're going down with it. So I started studying all the richest of the rich people. And you know what I actually found, Michael? I found that the top 1% of the top 1% did not diversify. They actually invested very heavily in one specific thing. And it was interesting to figure this out, but the secret was they invested in their business. And so they got really good. Like you look at the rich tycoons, they made most of their wealth through their business and through the real estate that their business owned. And so when you start looking at this idea of diversification is great to some extent if you're super risk averse. But if you truly want to achieve financial freedom in a short period of time, you have to find a way to get what's called asymmetric returns. And that's getting big returns with taking very little risk. And you just can't do that by investing in stocks and bonds. You're not going to get asymmetric returns. The way you get asymmetric returns is by flipping your own house or doing something where you control the end result. And if you're calculated and you have a good strategy and a good system, and I give a 7-step system in my book, then you can dramatically reduce not only the short-term risk, but the long-term risk of that investing strategy and still deliver really high returns to yourself.
Are you limited to locations, or you're like, look, wherever the opportunity, I don't care if any state in the union or even outside the country. What about, let's talk about location, choosing your locations.
We're franchising into all major metropolitans. So I tend to gravitate towards metropolitans that have a diverse economic job base. So we'll franchise into any major metro area. We are franchising right now and selling franchises in most metropolitan areas across the U.S. With that being said, there's people that you can make money on an apartment in small town America if you want. It's just not my forte. I like to buy in markets where there's a diverse job mix, because then it diversifies some of the risk across multiple job sectors. What happens in like your Detroits of the world and stuff like that is if one particular industry dominates that geographic area and that industry is hit, then you take some additional risk that way, because when people get laid off, guess what they don't pay? They don't pay their rent. And when they don't pay their rent, then you can't pay your mortgage. And when you can't pay your mortgage, then you're forced to sell. And when you're forced to sell, sometimes you have to lose money for your investors, which is, worst case scenario in this business is losing money for your investors.
So you're striding right now, right? Now let's talk about your long term, and let's talk about what do how do you strategize for your children what happens to all these properties? How, when you're holding on to these things, right? And their revenue, but that's a lot of, how does someone take over that when you're gone? What are the dynamics of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I started thinking about that recently. So first off, I want to encourage my children to pursue something they're passionate about and teach them how to be entrepreneurs at a young age. So I'm envisioning, let's say I got a girl and a boy. Let's say that she loves doing jewelry or whatever. I'll teach her how to start her own little jewelry business at age 7 or whatever and make that into a business. And so